Welcome to On the Bench here on Thursday, a day before Florida State plays at Brooks Field at Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham, North Carolina against Duke. 5-1 Duke, 1-5 FSU. Exactly how everybody drew it up in the preseason. I'm Chris. That's Zach. That will be the other voice you'll hear. Brendan is traveling today, so he's not joining us for On the Bench. On the Bench is brought to you by Chattanooga Whiskey. If you want to learn more about Chattanooga Whiskey, you can go to their website, chattanooga.whiskey.com, or to their store, Chat Whiskey to Go, if you're local and wants to go pick some up. The thing I like about Chat Whiskey to Go is that you can go and look at some of their featured items. Gives you kind of an idea of the kind of place they are, what they do, how they obviously have great regular brands you can get from them, but they also are experimental and do some very interesting things. If you're looking for a suggestion, I always mention Founders. I think the 12th anniversary blend is the most recent limited release of that. It's always very good. It's one that I always try to find here locally and pick up a bottle every year. And then our other sponsor, the Turner Group, down in Winter Park area, Central Florida, but really anywhere in the Sunshine State that you need housing needs as far as buying and selling, reach out to Colin and Company. You can go to theturnergroup.com. They do a great job. Zach mentioned he has personal experience with them. Went very well for he and his family when they were dealing with them. Great people, very big help. All right. So, as to avoid a message board thread complaining about advertisements, at least the ones that I can control, we're going to dive right into it. So, yeah, FSU goes and plays Duke. Duke's 5-1, 1-1 in the league. FSU 1-5, 1-4 in the league. Now, Duke hasn't really played a whole lot of people with a pulse. They beat Elon at Northwestern in 2 overtimes, UConn at Middle Tennessee, and then they had the comeback victory against UNC 21-20, and they lost 2 weeks ago. They also had a bye week like FSU this past week. They lost at Georgia Tech 24-14. So that's why they sit at that record. Zach, just diving right into it. What do you make of FSU versus Duke? And, to put kind of in perspective what's on the line here, FSU has never lost to Duke. They're 22-0 all time against Duke, including 8-0 in Durham. FSU's 22 wins are the most without a loss in a series between two current Power 4 teams in the poll era. That only dates back to 1936. And 22 straight wins is the second longest winning streak in a conference matchup in ACC history. So, is FSU going to sustain that streak, or do we see yet another thing snap this season?
Yeah, well, Vegas doesn't think so. Florida State opened as road underdogs to Duke to begin the week, and more money's gone in on Duke. I think they're 3-point favorites, and they opened at 1. So, yeah, I mean, right now it's looking like Vegas thinks that Florida State's going to take its first ever loss to Duke in football, and uh, I think the craziest thing about this game is that it's technically a sod game, right?
Yeah, I actually haven't heard that definitively, but based on the rules of sod games, yes, it would be a sod game.
Who predicted that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game boils down to whether Duke is, are they like their defense is like we talked about on the midseason review, like their defense is a really solid defense. I think it's like a top 30 unit nationally, but they've played not great teams to this point. Their two toughest games are probably UNC and Georgia Tech, and they beat UNC by a point. And UNC has a ton of problems with that squad, and Georgia Tech, they scored 14 points and lost by 10. So they're facing some of the similar struggles that Florida State has offensively, but their defensive unit has looked pretty solid to this point, and that's pretty much a staple for Manny Diaz and him running his defense at wherever he's been. He was at Penn State as their DC last year, and obviously Miami before that. I think, yeah, it's just going to come down to what does Florida State's offense look like under Brock Glenn against a team that FSU should be able to better match physically than Clemson. I know Duke's defense is ranked high, but FSU should be able to take advantage of some mismatches on offense, especially I think if you look at the tight end position and how those guys can get active like they did against Clemson, like that could be a little mismatch to work. But yeah, I think like every game this season, it seems like it boils down to whether FSU's offense will have a pulse To this point, in large part, they have not, but they obviously have a new quarterback in place in Brock Glenn. So, yeah, to me, it's just, is FSU's offense, do they look competent? Can they score 20 plus points? I think that's, if they can do that, then you have a real game on our hands. If not, then I think we're looking at just about how every game is unfolded this season for Florida State.
Yeah, I really do think it's a race to 21 in this game. Kelly Gramlich, who has a podcast with Eric McLean, good one, Gramlich and McLean, I believe is the podcast name, and her Twitter is at Kelly Gramlich, Lich is how you finish off her name. She had an interesting tweet yesterday. Every road underdog has covered every single one in an ACC football game played on a Friday night this season. Overall road teams in these Friday ACC games are 5-2, and Power 4 road teams are 5-1. I'm sorry, P4 road teams are 5-1. This Friday night, FSU's 3-point underdog. This was as of yesterday at Duke. A couple other interesting numbers and notes. Duke is 11-1 in their last 12 home games dating back to the 2022 season. They're 3-0 so far this year at home. Who knew Duke would become a hard place to play? But, I think Mike Elko's defense had a little bit to do that, and Manny's carried it over pretty well. Also, Duke this year leads the ACC so far through 7 weeks. In one-score victories, 8 points or less. They're 3-0 in such situations. Kind of speaks to the fact that they don't score a whole lot. I mean, their season high in points is 45. That was against Middle Tennessee. But throwing that out, they've had 26 3 times, 21 and 14 in their other games. So they are not a team that's particularly explosive offensively and putting up a lot of points. To Zach's point, what they do well is they do play defense very soundly. It's a good group overall at all 3 levels for them on that side of the ball. They went and got a lot of transfers. They welcomed an ACC high 49 newcomers to their squad this year. A lot of that is veteran guys, some of which are Ivy League guys. So you got relatively smart guys, good processors, and guys that understand the defensive scheme. They lead the country in tackles for loss generated per game. They average 3 sacks per game. So they're going to get after you. They're going to create negatives, which usually would be like, oh, that's a concern. But FSU loves negatives on offense. That's sort of what they've done this year. So to me, it's just sort of another game where FSU is going to have to deal with that. I think, and I wrote this in my prediction, and I picked FSU to win, but I really think it's a coin flip game. I picked FSU to win 21-20, which speaks to the level of confidence I have in either of these teams being particularly explosive and creating a lot of points. For FSU to win, one, they can't turn it over more than Duke. Really, they probably shouldn't turn it over at all in this game, and they need to generate takeaways. They need to generate additional possessions, shorten the game, give themselves more opportunities than Duke essentially has on the day. And I think the other thing is when those pressures come, some are going to get home for Duke and create negatives and spoil drives for FSU. FSU's going to probably rack up a few 3-and-outs in this game. They've been pretty good at racking up 3-and-outs this year. But for them to win, there has to be examples of them essentially hitting on an explosive, countering the blitz, the aggressiveness of Duke, whether that is vertically through the passing game or, getting them in a screen game because they have too many bodies in the backfield, or using Brock Glenn's legs effectively and allowing him to scamper, break free when the numbers game, the hack game plays in his favor and allows him to get upfield. I think for FSU to pull off an upset, in quotations, that's what they've got to do. And the defense has to show up. FSU's defense has, in general, played better in recent games. I guess SMU would probably be what we would view as somewhat of an exception there. That's not to say they've played particularly well. They've just kind of been bend, don't break. Teams get to the red zone. They're not allowing a lot of touchdowns, more field goals, stuff like that. They can't come out and have a dud. They have a dud, and FSU's offense plays half decent. The world's going to be even more on fire than we already thought going into it. That won't be any fun for anybody. Certainly won't be fun for us to have to cover this football team. But yeah, on Duke's personnel, Malik Murphy is their quarterback. He's a transfer from Texas. He's a big kid, 6'5", 230. He's hitting at 60% on the season, has 1,400 passing yards, 14 passing touchdowns, which going into last week, into their bye, was 9th in the nation and 5 interceptions on the season. He's done a fairly good job of valuing the ball. He is not a threat with his legs. Traditionally, hasn't really been this year at all. That's a good thing for FSU. Scrambling quarterbacks have been a bugaboo for FSU. Running back Star Thomas is a talented kid. He's a type that you got to tackle on the first opportunity. If you allow him to get going, he will make it a long day for you. In my opinion, he's probably the guy that their entire offense sort of keys off of. Wide receiver Jordan Moore is an experienced player there. He has 30 receptions for 443 this year with 3 receiving touchdowns. He's a 6 foot, 195-pound receiver. He's a talented kid. FSU's familiar with him from past experiences. And as I mentioned on defense, they're very good at all levels. I highlight Vincent Anthony Jr. at defensive end. He's a junior defensive end, 3.5 sacks, 5 quarterback hurries. He does a really good job of getting home. But really, it's a group effort on defense more so than like an individual that you single out. Alex Howard's a talented linebacker. Cameron Bergeron's a talented linebacker. Wesley Williams is another talented defensive end. And then I really like what they have in their secondary. I think they do a very good job in the back half of just being difficult for opposing teams. Terry Moore has 2 picks for them back there. He's a junior safety, big kid at 6'1", 200. He's probably the best pro potential type guy back there. But in general, their secondary is good at getting it done. At corner, they have Chandler Rivers, who's a junior. He's been there a good while, done a good job for them. Joshua Pickett plays opposite him. Terry Moore, as we mentioned, their rovers. Jalen Stinson, kind of a smallish guy, 5'8", 177, but talented. And that star position, which is Cameron Bergeron, it will play like a linebacker, but it can also play like a safety. They'll kind of flex it, and they play both him and Trey Freeman. When Freeman's in there, it's more as a traditional linebacker. When Bergeron's in there, it's sort of playing to all parts of the field. A 40-pound difference between those two guys, with Freeman being the heavier one at 230, kind of speaks to what they're trying to do when they insert one over the other into the lineup. But yeah, for FSU to go to Wallace Wade Stadium and get what they have to get, it comes down to me. It's basically win the possession count, don't give short fields, play sound defense, and hit on a few explosives. I don't think FSU is going to go in there and have consistent offensive success. I think it's more important that they have consistent defensive success and they don't have blunders on offense that are so critical, negative / giving Duke basically points off of the turnover or the short field or the bad punt or whatever. Make Duke earn their stuff. I'm not convinced Duke's offense is really any more capable than FSU's offense, though Duke's offense is more efficient than FSU's offense.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know, just talking to some people around FSU's program, I think they respect Duke's defensive line a good amount, just with how hard those guys play. They think highly of Jordan Moore, the receiver, and obviously they're familiar with him because the 2 teams played last season in Doak. And then, have we heard anything on Jacquez Moore, the running back, and his health? I know he hasn't played much this season, but he's a talented player.
Manny didn't have any kind of update that I saw in his comments, I think on Tuesday of this week when his press conference essentially was. He played the first 2 games of the season. I think he got hurt in that second game, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
I essentially have approached this game entirely not expecting him to play. I don't know if I should be viewing it in a different manner or not.
I looked for some updates on that. The reason I bring that up is because he was obviously really solid for them last year. If you remember that Duke game against Florida State last season, he was the one that broke that run out to the outside and kind of torched FSU's defense that way. And he's a really solid player. He's actually from Live Oak, Florida, so kind of local kid. And I'm looking at his game log here, and it sounds like he got injured in that second game against Northwestern, and then came back for 1 carry against North Carolina a few weeks ago. But since then hasn't played at all. So just a guy that I know that FSU is scouting as a possibility, but I don't think he's expected to play. I mean, I agree with you, Chris. Like, I think the defense needs to show up because we've seen like mixed results from them this season. I think the Clemson score, like with it being, obviously, Clemson not eclipsing 30 and like them getting to the red zone so many times and not scoring touchdowns, it was, if you look at the stats of that game, I mean, FSU's defense got dominated. And we know they do play a bend, don't break style of defense, but you can't let Duke, run up and down the field on you like that. So definitely looking to see some improvement there. I'm interested to see kind of what the personnel looks like. I know we can't really get into that because you guys are watching practice, but especially on the back end of the defense. Some of those guys like a Conrad Hussey have been, inconsistent at best for Florida State this season. I'm interested to see what the safety rotation looks like. And then, obviously DJ Lundy was announced out for the season at linebacker. So that'll be an interesting dynamic with a bunch of young guys expected to play a lot of snaps there. I think, I'm for, continuing this youth movement for Florida State. I think it's important to note that it's going to come with some, youth moments, right? Like guys are going to make mistakes. You're going to have to live with that all over the field. I think on offense, especially, like, you're trusting, a couple of true freshmen tight ends and wideouts that are probably going to play a good amount. A running back, like there are guys all over the field that are going to be playing in a road environment. And I know Duke's not a road environment to write home about, but like it is. You are underdogs in this game, so no, I think I'm hopeful. If I'm doing a prediction, I'm probably predicting Florida State to win this game. And not by a lot, obviously. I think it'll be a close margin, but I do think FSU can win this game. I think Brock Glenn gives them a good shot. I'm interested to see how the offensive line holds up. Sounds like they're gonna, based on the depth chart, roll with Andre Otto and possibly Jalen Early at the guard
early
position.
at guard.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Too young.
Yeah, and that's the way Alex Atkins talked about it on Wednesday, I believe, is when we talked to Alex. Might have been Tuesday. Days getting mixed up with a weird week. No, it was Monday. Hey, I was wrong both times. But yeah, that's the way Alex talked about, was that he expects both of those guys to be at guard. I think some of that is trying to get a little bit more athleticism at guard. TJ Ferguson's been a disappointment, to put it politely. And a lot of those guys are banged up anyways. Richie Leonard getting hurt really took you away from having your best guard in the sense of ability and talent and experience. And you've been kind of soul searching ever since. I am interested to see the youth movement continue. You're right. Blunders come with that. Speaking of blunders, this year on takeaways, Duke has 48 points. Conversely, on giveaways, they've only allowed 7 points. That kind of speaks to their winning formula. 41-point advantage on turnover margin is pretty damn impressive. I know FSU's definitely isn't in that ballpark. The one interesting thing to me is Duke isn't particularly good in the red zone at generating plays offensively. They just struggle with it. FSU has been pretty good in the red zone. I think teams only scoring at a 75% clip on FSU in red zone, but they've held a lot of teams to a lot of field goals. I think that's one of those like subcontext things to keep an eye on. Obviously, FSU stinks offensively on third down. Duke is very good defensively on third down. That's another battle I'm kind of keeping an eye on. It's an intriguing game. I mean, FSU is going to have their 6 offensive line combination in 7 games. Duke is going to be, I think, working with their second on the season. Might be their third, but there's been a great deal of consistency up front. Kind of speaks to what they're doing there. Defensively, FSU keeps doing interchangeable parts. We'll probably see KJ Kirkland, Shaheem Brown starting beside each other, but in a different way than we've seen Shai use this season, with them moving him around. You talked about some of the other stuff on defense. Lundy being out, what will linebackers look like? Who will get the nod there? With Duke, you look at their starting defense through the first half of their season, and I think outside of maybe, I think it's middle linebacker and star, which are using 2 guys anyways, it's been exactly the same for every game. And at middle linebacker, Nicholas, who will probably be the starter against FSU, has started 4 of 6 games. So again, it speaks to like Duke knows exactly who and what they are. They're really good at it. FSU is soul searching, trying to figure it out, throwing things against the wall, seeing what sticks, playing young guys, which is one bright spot we currently have going on in the sense of actually caring about things and paying attention to it and maybe trying to project to the future. But this is an important one for FSU. How many wins are there truly that exist on FSU's back half of the schedule where you go into it feeling confident? You're at Duke, which you can win, is a winnable game, but certainly not one you're writing in Sharpie. At Miami, odds are going to say you're not going to win that, but it's a rivalry game. Go and play your backsides off, see how it turns out. But Miami's a much better football team than FSU. North Carolina, who is equally as bad as FSU, that's going to be an ugly mess on November 2nd in Tallahassee. At Notre Dame, we know Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame lost to NIU. They've got some issues. Riley Leonard's not setting the world on fire as a passer. But one would think Notre Dame at Notre Dame against this FSU team is obviously going to be favored and should win. So not feeling optimistic there. Charleston Southern is one you need to win. And Florida, who is apparently beat to a living pulp going into who did they have this week? Kentucky, I think it is. I mean, their injury report is massively long. Obviously, Mertz towards ACL, which stinks for that young man. So they're dealing with it. But that's going to be another sort of like the UNC game, probably an ugly battle between two teams. So can FSU win 2, 3, 4 on the back half of the schedule? Yeah, maybe. But this 1-5 football team doesn't give you confidence really to beat anybody on any given week. So my point is they've got to start somewhere. And Friday's an excellent opportunity to try to start doing something different, coming out of a bye, trying to be a better football team. You've moved on from DJU at quarterback, which was a massive failure and a horrendous concept in retrospect and hindsight. And now you have Brock Glenn at quarterback, and you hope that maybe you can start setting the sails and actually having an offense that's capable of scoring into the reasonable amount that college football teams need to score in this day and age to win football games. And Friday's a great opportunity to start that. I'm not convinced they will start doing that, but I think it's a more realistic option than it's been at any other point this season.
I'll just throw in a quick score prediction because I know you already did. I'll go FSU 21, Duke 17. So I think FSU eclipses the 20-point mark finally since the first game of the season.
I forget what it was on Sportsline. I think the over-under is like 42, 42 and a half. So, like, yeah, nobody expects a whole lot of points in this one. And that plays to what Duke is and what FSU's been offensively. So, all right, enough about a football game that usually we would not care about for opposite reasons. But, hey, this year we get to care about because we're 1-5. Recruiting. FSU landed 2 this week. Did they technically lose any this week? And who was the last decommitment? Was it Dalen McCutcheon?
I think it was Dalen McCutcheon.
And we've talked about that, correct?
I don't remember if we did, but if we didn't, FSU only has one receiver commit remaining, CJ Wiley, the 4-star out of Georgia. They lose Dalen McCutcheon. Obviously, had lost Malik Clark, who had flipped to South Carolina before. Dalen McCutcheon flips to Texas. He's from Texas, 4-star wideout that FSU landed over the summer. That's a big loss. And Dalen McCutcheon is a really solid player. We talked about him at length on here, after he committed and a long time because FSU was in on him for a while. But he flips to in-state Texas. What are you going to do? It's Texas. If they want a receiver in-state, they're probably going to get him. And we know how the effects of this season are impacting Florida State's recruiting efforts. But I think what's interesting about the receiver decommitments, and I think we didn't talk about this because they offered a few receivers earlier that day before McCutcheon decommitted. So that makes me think that they got word that he was going to flip later on that day. They offered a few new receivers in the 2025 class. One was Donovan Murph, who was a recent reclassification from the 2026 to the 2025 class. Not a guy I think FSU really has a shot for. He's probably going to stay in state, right, Chris?
Yeah, it seems like South Carolina and Clemson are 2 trending the most there. He's taking visits, I think, Ohio State. I think he intends to see like Bama, Tennessee, a few of the current juggernaut types. But everything I've been told about that is, it's South Carolina, Clemson at the top battling out.
Gotcha. Then the 2 others were both in-state kids. One is Javon Boggs, who I think is a really good player. He's out of Cocoa, a 4-star wide receiver committed to UCF. Last season as a junior, he went up against Venice High School, who had cornerback Charles Lester, who's now on FSU's roster as a true freshman. Boggs went in one-on-one coverage against Lester the entire game. He went for like 200 plus yards and multiple touchdowns. So he's a really solid player. And he's a guy I think that might not wow you with, athletic testing, but he's just like solid and his hands are impressive. Like he's got the tools to be a solid college football player. I don't, beyond that, I know that the traits will tell you, hey, this guy might not project well to the NFL, but I think he can be a really solid player at the next level. And the other guy is Tae'shaun Gelsey, who is out of Jacksonville. He's a bigger frame target, a guy that I think we're all looking at as someone in that CJ Wiley type role. and obviously CJ Wiley's recruitment is a little bit in question, or his commitments in question right now, just because he's taken recent visits to Georgia. LSU's still involved, Auburn, Tennessee, both trying to make plays at him. He's saying all the right things about Florida State and his commitment, but behind the scenes, he's definitely giving other schools a real look. But Tae'Shaun Gelsey, he's a solid player that we've known about for a while. FSU was evaluating him as a tight end for a little bit, but it sounds like they've offered him fully at wide receiver. He early on in his recruitment, I was told, he had solid offers in the summer, and he essentially worked out at an FSU camp and one of the Mike Norvell June camps, and hoping to get an offer from Florida State. So I think FSU's an offer that he's coveted for a while. Finally gets it. We'll see. Like he told me when we talked that he's likely going to try to take a trip to Florida State, but that he's going to have to talk it over with his family. He's committed to UF, so that's the obstacle there. But Florida State has some ins there just because of him, I think, wanting that offer for so long, and they've been in communication with him for quite some time. So yeah, those are the two new offers at wide receiver, and that's kind of the new board that's been established at that position after losing two of the three commitments, and with the other one like CJ Wiley, like I mentioned, up in question as to whether he'll stick or not.
On Boggs, he was Mr. Florida last year, was on a state championship team, ultra productive. He's just a guy who's really good at playing football. Like, he is not flashy, he's not special athletically compared to some. Right? Like, CJ Wiley is freaky. He's got some real high end ability. Javon Boggs is just extremely good at doing his job, and you can live with that all damn day. It's amazing to me that it took that long to offer Boggs. But I also know FSU once had 3 receivers that they really liked in their class. Moving on from that, tight end's another spot where we've seen a little bit of not board expansion, but they did go on Jeremiah Jones, young man from Murray, Kentucky, who was here a couple times, once in the spring, once in the summer, worked out. He was excellent at FSU's elite camp. We said that in real time. Zach wrote that when he did his top performers from the event. He got an offer here recently. Do we think that speaks to concern with Chase Lofton, or does it simply speak to Jeremiah Jones is talented and somebody that you want to add to an offense that needs playmakers?
I have not heard anything to suggest that his offer is in relation to Lofton, and I will say I heard this today that he could be a guy that FSU brings in with the option to play, either tight end or wide receiver. Jeremiah Jones is 6'4", 200 pounds, so a big body, and like Chris mentioned, I thought he was the best performer at the FSU's elite camp in early June. Like I think we all kind of agreed after watching him, and I know Dane's a big fan of his game, even before that, and we all kind of agreed that we thought FSU should have offered then. I mean, he moves super well for his size. Like, he looks like a guy that could play wide receiver, and definitely moves exceptionally well for a guy that could project as a tight end. I know there was some question back then if you're looking at him as a tight end, when it comes to his physicality and how he'll fill out as a guy that can help you in the blocking game. But I think the correct way to look at him is a true, pass catching weapon, a big body that you can put out there as a mismatch type. And I think that's what Florida State's kind of looking at him now. And I think that's largely why they offered. I think it's less to do with Lofton and maybe more so to do with the receiver decommitments, and trying to find some options there. I think he's pretty open. When it comes to when it comes to his recruitment, he's committed to Nebraska. I think he's pretty open to other schools. I was told that one of his main connections at Nebraska, I think that individual is no longer on staff there. I don't know who exactly that is, but I was told that. And it sounds like he's going to take an official visit to Missouri as well in November. I know Florida State's working to get him set up for an OV. I think that'll likely come on one of those final 2 home games, so either Charleston Southern or UF for Florida State. But it sounds like Florida State has some momentum to be able to set up those OVs and truly get in on this recruitment, despite offering kind of later on in the process.
Just a quick rundown on some other recent offers. Chaz Coleman from Warren, Ohio, Warren G. Harding High School. He's an edge type, 6'5", 2.25. He got offered by FSU in the last week. I talked to him, I believe it was yesterday, might have been the day before, asking if an official had been set up. Not yet, but he is an intriguing edge prospect, I think is how Zach wrote it. People love the word intriguing this time of year. It's sort of one of those that sets him off. Christian Ingram, defensive lineman from Covington, Georgia, Newton, 6'6", 290, big boy. Looks like FSU was late to the party there because he has 5 officials set up, basically running through the end of November into the early signing period. FSU is going to have to bump somebody off that list. I'm not feeling optimistic that that comes, so not going to waste any more time there. Tim Griffin's been on the board a little bit longer. Covington, Georgia, Alcovey, 6'5", 255, kind of an edge right now, but probably develops into an interior guy. I think FSU likes him as an interior guy. Odell Higgins went to see him play last week. I believe it was on Friday. I was up in Alcovey myself at that point. With Griffin, working on an OV, not yet set up. He thinks it's going to be North Carolina, but again, not locked in. Another one who's a little bit more, not super recent, but still relatively recent, Benny Patterson from Newburgh, Indiana, Castle High School, visited USC last weekend. He's got several visits coming up. FSU's among them. I think Indiana, he just added another one that I can't remember off the top of my head, Cincinnati commitment. FSU will get him in November, take a big swing at him. We'll see. So, yeah, D-line board has been expanded, but it's not one where I would say we're feeling like they're trending in a real positive direction with anybody specific at this moment. They're going to try to get a few on campus in November, take a big swing. They're going to have to try to get somebody committed. No, one of those is Chance Litton, who's from Georgia. He's been on the board a bit longer. Actually came for a game a couple weeks ago, but he's trending towards Georgia. Supposed to be at FSU for North Carolina for an official. We'll see if that holds true. I believe Rivals put out recently a top 3, didn't include FSU. It included Rutgers, who he's previously committed to, Georgia, and Georgia Tech, who he's seeing this weekend. So, yeah, I think that's about it on those. Now, on the addition side of it all, FSU added 2 commitments here recently. Mario Nash Jr., Daniel Pierre-Louis, both officially visited for Clemson. Nash was committed to Mississippi State, longtime target for FSU. FSU and him have a very lengthy relationship. We've gotten to see his body kind of evolve over that time. He's a longer armed guy. I think he can play multiple spots on the offensive line. I think he can get away with being a right tackle. Daniel Pierre-Louis is somebody who kind of got on the radar in June. FSU had him in for a camp, liked him a lot. He came back later in June for more of like a true visit. And then he came, or didn't come in July, but he got an offer in July. He officially visited for Clemson. He visited NC State this past weekend. Officially, they took a lineman, I believe, from Tennessee, Michael Clark, who covers NC State for us, told me that basically wrapped up their high school O-line class. And literally minutes after he told me that is when Daniel went public with a commitment to FSU. I think Pierre-Louis is wholeheartedly a guard. I don't think he can get away with being a tackle. Maybe he can be a center. I don't know if he can snap or not. He's got very long arms, which is appealing, and there's some good stuff to work with there. I just don't think the feet are capable of being a tackle. And truthfully, even as a guard, I don't know if I love him as a pulling type, but I know he can work forward. If you want to be a road grader, I think he can be decent at that. FSU's got to add O-lineman. They whiffed in the summer, to just put it bluntly. Especially at tackle. I think Mario is sort of one of those that will help you at tackle. Sean Perrette, who's a kid that FSU's been involved with for a good while, USF commitment. He's another one worth keeping an eye on. I think they'll probably get him in for an official, possibly for the UF game. And he is one that I think they're going to continue to push for. And he's probably got the best natural tackle elements of a body to him. His main issue is he's just kind of thin. I think he was like 265, if I recall correctly, in June or July when he came to FSU. So you worry about weight with him. It's kind of like going back to the Josh Petty argument of, can you bulk this guy up? How much can you bulk him up to? What do you believe he will be? But yeah, FSU's in this situation because they had numerous tackles in for officials over the summer, and none of those ended up on their commitment list. So now they are having to satisfy their needs through the high school ranks by getting a few of these guys down the stretch. None of them are, break glass in case of emergency. Just started recruiting them last week. Now they're committed type guys, but they were all at one point or another, basically, to me, plan B types for FSU.
Yeah. It's an interesting haul because I think once again, besides Mario Nash, you're probably projecting all 4 of, or all, the other 3 of FSU's offensive line commits to be guards at the next level. And I think that FSU needs to trend more in the direction of adding guys that have tackle bodies that, can, whether it's they're thin now, but they're 6'7" and have long arms like that. Those are the types of guys that you can develop into, big time offensive tackle targets that, we've seen, the proof is in the pudding with the transfer portal and not being able to find quality, not just offensive tackles, that's an extreme rarity, but offensive linemen. I mean, it's tough. Like we saw what FSU did this offseason. Some of those recruitments they won, were recruitments that were highly contested, like a Terrence Ferguson, and that's a guy that you're essentially benching at this point of the season. So, yeah, I mean, I think they need to trend more towards taking some of those longer bodies along the offensive line. I do like the addition of Mario Nash. I think he's a really good player. That was a really solid get for FSU, considering where they're at. With this season and just how it's gone to this point, like that. That feels like a nice win for them along the offensive line. He's a guy that can play tackle. Doesn't is not like super tall or anything. I think he's 6'4" and he's 280 pounds, but a really solid player, guy that we've seen in person. I think Dane and Clay watched him at an Under Armour camp earlier this year, and liked him a lot. So yeah, I think I like that addition. I think Daniel Pierre-Louis is an interesting one just because that feels like a guy that is probably you're going to have to, like you said, play at guard. And with what they like to do with their guards, with the athleticism that requires, it feels like an interesting fit. But we'll see kind of how he develops. And the other two offensive linemen that I was referencing that are committed, Solomon Thomas, obviously the 5-star interior guy, who
pretty good.
Yeah, he's been committed since December. A really, really solid player and guy that I think, it's really hard to project offensive linemen to contribute very early in their careers. I think he could probably contribute year one just based on his body and
I think he could contribute on Friday night.
Yeah. I mean, talking to Solomon Thomas, I mean, we've talked about this before, but he's one of the more impressive, just human beings to talk to in this, 2025 recruiting class for Florida State. Like really impressive. And they have a number of those types. I think Byron Lewis kind of comes up, the running back commit, in that same category.
CJ Wiley. CJ Wiley sticking to FSU to this point has been all about maturity and wanting to some degree be faithful to his word and what he said and believing in the decision he made regardless of the results that are on the field. Sorry, I digress.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've kind of had that same thought too. And then Peyton Joseph is the other offensive lineman committed to FSU. He's full on a guard. Solomon Thomas, you could probably get away with playing him at right tackle, I guess, but probably don't want to do that just because I think he could be in, probably first round NFL draft pick at guard. But yeah, I mean, it's a solid group for Florida State. Like you have three guys that are ranked in the top 247 along the offensive line with Thomas, Joseph, and Nash. And then Daniel Pierre-Louis is the latest addition. And like you said, like with a guy like Sean Perrette, they're on the hunt for more offensive linemen to bring in, which I think is smart. But throw more numbers at it in the high school ranks, like we've been kind of talking about, and yeah, it's kind of the rundown on that.
On Mario Nash Jr., he was the UA Atlanta offensive line MVP. That's the camp that Zach referenced that Dane and Clay were at. I think with Mario is the arm length measurements are really good, and that probably would allow him to get away with being a tackle. On DPL, Daniel Pierre-Louis, the thing I recall is that when he camped in June, I remember watching that group work and essentially the comment being made to me of, yeah, he could play here. And so, yeah, FSU believes in camp evals on the O-line. They always have. Otto is a great example of a guy that kind of fits into that narrative. Jaden Todd in last year's class is another one. They're always going to kind of take one, maybe two in a class that they feel that way about. That's just been a trend for them. But at the end of the day, they got to get a real left tackle in the building. It's a desperate need. Everybody has that need in college football, and there's only so many of them. But, yeah, FSU's got to do it, and it's got to be somebody that's a better quality football player via the portal. More than likely, it's going to be via the portal than what they get with like a Jeremiah Byers, who has been a consistent starter but comes with his warts. So, yeah. All right, Byers and Owen, real quick, brought to you by
the Turner Group.
Thank you, Colin. College football should be played on a Friday.
I'll buy just for the fact that I'm never going to want to take away another day of watching college football from a week. Like I'm always going to buy more football. Are you a Sonone here?
I'm a Sonone. I think Friday night should be left alone and be high school.
Yeah, I can see that argument. I just like in the sense that like I don't know. It's not like they're filling an entire slate with with college football games. It's usually one or two games on. To me, it's just I can like it's like I'm a huge college football fan, right? So I'm gonna go watch the Thursday night MAC game or whatever, right? Like I'm gonna go watch whatever game's on. So to me, like I know high school football is important, but it's not like people are sitting down at home and being like, hey, let's go watch some high school football. And I know you're talking about some people that may be occupied with that due to their kids playing or whatever. But yeah, I'm never gonna turn down some more college football games to watch.
Zach had his eyes taped wide open last night watching Sam Houston State ball. Byers Sonone, FSU will win more than 3 games out of their final 6.
So no.
All right. If I said 3 or more, what would that have done to you?
Sonone.
Still would have been Sonone? All right. So you're taking under 3.
I think I'd go 2 probably. I think they win Charleston Southern and then probably one of Duke, North Carolina, and Florida. I think to me, Miami and Notre Dame are losses. I don't, I know Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, but they've got a solid like run since then. They blew out Stanford. They blew out they not against great teams, obviously, but they're playing solid football to the point where like I just I don't trust Florida State to go on the road in South Bend and win that game. But yeah, I mean, I think the Duke game is obviously winnable, like we talked about. North Carolina's not playing great football. I think they've lost 4 straight. And Mac Brown was on the verge of quitting the team after the giving up 70 points to James Madison. But yeah, I mean, I think Florida's a better team than people give them credit for. I know they're not great, but they play a really tough schedule, and they almost just beat Tennessee on the road.
But Florida, Tennessee traditionally is always it's. I want to use a certain word, but this is a family-friendly podcast. It's always an odd game. Like, and Tennessee is almost allergic to beating Florida.
True, but they're also a pretty talented squad, and they played decently this year. So like, yeah, I don't know. Florida's going to be interesting, right? Because they have to start the true freshman DJ Lagway the rest of the way, with Graham Mertz out, and I think that's probably obviously hurt for Mertz. Like he did a lot for them, and he was a really good player. But that's probably a good thing for Florida, and especially with Billy Napier and his job security. Like I think if he's gonna get another year, it's gonna be on the back of how DJ Lagway performs and selling like, hey, I got this guy here. This is how he's performing year 1, kind of thing. And what better way to do that than going and beating FSU on the road? I think FSU can win that game. Obviously, that's a long ways away. We'll see what both these teams look like, especially after Florida has that absolute gauntlet of a stretch towards the back half of the season. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably going 2 wins right now. Are you more optimistic, Chris?
I'm a Sonone on more than 3. If it was 3 included, I would probably be a push. I think 3 is attainable.
Charleston,
Southern, I think Duke and Charleston Southern are certainly games you can win. I think one, if not both, North Carolina and Florida games you can contend to win. But they got to be better. The offense has to show signs of life that they're capable of scoring at some relatively respectable number. They also have to run the ball, better than Kent State. So, yeah, good times. All right, last Byers Sonone. This is a good time to end the podcast.
It froze for me.
Oh, Zach, you kill it. We definitely didn't stick to landing. All right. Final buyer Snowden brought to you by
The Turner Group.
This is a good time to end the podcast.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.